Hi, my name is Byron. I've been a songwriter for 10 years now, and I've been having this idea lately that I'd like to write a book about how to write a song. And I thought maybe YouTube could be an interesting way to organize some of those thoughts and ideas. So this will be the first of a series. Don't really know how long it's going to last or all the details, but I've got a list of themes I'd like to cover. So I guess I'm going to try that. So if you're interested in writing songs, if you're a songwriter, if you've never written a song but it's something you'd like to do, this could be maybe interesting for you. So most people when they start, they usually have been writing in a diary, kind of doing poetry, or they've been learning an instrument and they're ready to try and write their own songs. And one of the reasons I think there's not really like a book that everyone thinks about when they think about writing a song is that it's something that's so hard to describe, and it's kind of always slipping out of your fingers, because if you just try and copy what someone else has done, you're not really making something original. But on the other hand, there are kind of ideas or strategies or techniques you can learn and can study, and these might help you. So my strategy is always to keep learning, always be learning everywhere, always be ready for a song fragment to kind of slip into your brain. And for me, that's personally how it started. I started by just becoming like obsessed with a certain band and just loving it and just wanting to write lyrics. So I just filled up a book full of lyrics, and then I went to buddies, and then I pretty much said, you guys want to start a band in high school. But that's kind of another subject. I could write a whole other book about how to make a band, and maybe one day I will, but I'm going to try and focus on songwriting. So the main theme for this episode is story. It's pretty basic, but I think it's a good place to start. And by story, I don't just mean there's a guy and something happens to the guy, and then there's a resolution, or he has an adventure, and then there's an ending. That is a story. But there's also, for example, I'm working on a song right now called I Don't Want a Job. And anyways, it's not like there's something that happens to the guy in the song. It's not like he goes somewhere and something happens. But it is the story of his life, and it's the story of what he's going through. So the story is still present, even if it's not a Disney tale. So, story. And that's another funny thing about writing, is that you can't have all this stuff floating in your head when you go to write a song. You know what I mean? I always like to describe or think about that moment when a song is coming, and it kind of passes through you. You get, visions of things, and it's just all happening at once, and it's a very exciting moment when you're actually writing a song, or you're onto something. So that's kind of what I would suggest, is that you try and find that moment where you're just willing to try it. So there's kind of a couple strategies. You can start with music first, and for that you need to be able to kind of have music. It doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, Bob Dylan, there's 1,000 artists where the song isn't that complicated. You know what I mean? Neutral Milk Hotel. Like, if you've been playing a guitar for a year, you can probably play every song on Airplane Over the Sea. But that doesn't mean that the songs are bad. But anyways, you need some kind of music. So you can either figure out how to play an instrument, or you go and work with somebody who does play music. So first you get the music, and then, I don't know, I like to have a book full of ideas, so that when the music's there, you got something to lean on. It's hard to kind of come up with something on the spot, I find. So I like to kind of prepare myself and have material ready when I am working with somebody. On the other hand, you could just hear the music, and then you hear like a melody, and you can just chase that. But what I really find, you've got to establish some kind of meter There has to be a structure for the words to fall into place. Like when I started, I didn't even know that sentences had to be a certain amount of length. You know what I mean? I thought you could have a really long sentence and then a short sentence, and then it took me a while to learn everything, but you need that kind of hook to kind of sink yourself and then ground you. Once you have one idea, one phrase, you can really kind of build a song out of it, even if it's really kind of tedious and then you have to think about the meter all the time. But I like it best when you get into a flow and then the story just kind of pours out of you. So I don't know, it's hard to describe, but you kind of have to be ready for a whole bunch of situations. But anyways, going back to story. We're going back to the different approaches to writing. You can start with the music, you can start with the lyrics, or you can start with the concept. You can be like, I want to make an upbeat song, or I want to make a sad song, or I want to make a song that sounds like Talking Heads and Bob Dylan mixed together. So that's kind of 3 ideas. You can start with the music, you can start with the lyrics, or you can start with the concept. But then once you, how do you begin? That's the $1 million question, is how do you start? But yeah, a couple of rules I like to think about is that if you want to write, you have to read. So the best idea is just to study music. If you've been studying music all your life, like most people do because they just enjoy it, it's kind of, you already have a bank in your head of ideas. So anyways, how to begin. Alright, so the question is, where to begin? Now, we've already established that this episode is going to be about story. But that's not really enough to get you going. But it's enough to know that something has to be happening. Some kind of adventure or conflict. Something has to be going down. And like when I've noticed that the best time writing works is when you're passionate about something. You're invested in it. You know what I mean? You could be pissed off about something. You can be feeling grateful for something. But there's an emotional connection to start you. And that's kind of like the fuel. So really just start anywhere. You know what I mean? Anything. Anything can be about a song. But make something be happening. Make it be driving forward. And essentially you're setting the stage. There's kind of some kind of problem. Or there's some kind of duality happening, you know? There's contrast. And what usually happens is that's real life. There's problems and there's conflict. And it's been said that art or myth is a make-believe answer. So you're making something up to a real life problem. So it is based in reality, but you're kind of making up a solution for it or a resolution. So it can be as simple as that, really. You're presenting conflict, and then there's kind of what happens is they call it like the cornerstone or the keystone. So if you have 2 ideas pushing against each other, at one point they meet, and that creates a bridge. And in the bridge, if you look at them, there's usually a stone in the middle that's different than the others. And what happens is that stone catches all that force being pushed. And the same force pushing down is the same force that keeps it up. So that image is a bridge. There's energy pushing down, there's tension, and then there's a place or an idea or even a word that resolves it. It allows it to stay up. If it was just chaos, it would just fall apart. So what I'm going to try and do is what they call deconstruct something. And the thing to understand about that is that you can take something apart and not destroy it. So you can take something apart, see how it works, and you should be able to put it back together. If you were just destroying art by trying to understand it, you would just tear it all apart. But deconstructing it is you keep it intact. You keep the ideals. You kind of honor things. So yeah, I'm not a professor. Anyways, this is going to be pretty ranty. I'm trying to figure it all out, probably as best as I could have them. But again, the subject is so whimsy and just it always kind of falls through your fingers. Because again, if you think you've got it figured out, like Bob Dylan said, once you think you've got it made, you're dead in the water. That's a very dangerous place to be. So again, art, this is really about art. Songwriting is an art, and art should be kind of pushing the envelope. But on the other hand, art has other purposes. Like it's enough that art is just meant to be pleasant and that we can enjoy it. And it passes the time or it connects us. And sometimes art is like that, or the lyrical content is more internal. It's talking about less of the world that we all share together, but of personal experience. So again, that makes it like good and bad. It's hard to describe it, but that's because it's also so open and there's just so much things you can do. But again, you should enjoy it. You should be having music, or you should be writing in your journal. And then once you got something that's good, it'll kind of ring true. It should stand on its own 2 feet. Art should stand on its own 2 feet. It shouldn't need someone there being, oh, this is what I meant, or this is what it means. It should be able to live on its own. So that's really important to understand. It should have its own life force. So again, story. There's a world. There's a setting. There's something happening. There's a place. And one of the best tools we have in writing is describing things. And then when we describe things, we can use language to make them interesting. You know what I mean? We can say something about the thing just by describing it. It can be a blue sky. It can be a dark sky. It can be a beautiful sky. It can be a scary sky. You know what I mean? Those are all stories. But the way we describe things, the language we use, is one of the biggest tools we have in songwriting. So always be thinking about language, interesting language. Keep an ear out. When you hear something interesting, don't just take it for granted. Just because you've heard an expression 1,000 times doesn't mean it's not interesting. Doesn't mean there's not a story there. So you can always be playing. So you always got to be working. That's kind of what I think, is that you always got to have a part of your brain that's just listening, waiting for inspiration. Because sometimes that's another reality, is that we don't always just get to sit down and be like, today I'm going to write a song. You could probably write a song doing that. There's no denying you can just kind of muscle your way through it. But is that the best song? Or is that how the best songs are written? Or is that the best songs you're going to write in that method of just being like, I'm going to sit down? I think there's something to be said for the different styles and philosophies we can have when we approach writing or creating. For example, there's the architect and gardener approach. The architect has everything planned out. He knows how many bricks he needs. He knows how many workers he needs. He knows how the levels are going to work. He knows what the material on the wall is going to be. He has it all planned out before he even starts. And that can work sometimes. Another approach is gardening. You have a plan. You know what you want. But you kind of have to work with what happens. You react to what happens. And they're not exclusive. See? This is another big example of polarity, duality, contradiction. So there's the gardener, there's the architect. The architect is supposed to have everything planned out, and the gardener rolls with the punches. But really, the architect sometimes has problems. Sometimes he doesn't have the bricks he needs, or sometimes someone's sick, or sometimes it's just not working. There's something wrong with the foundation or something, so he has to adjust. And then the gardener, he seems whimsical, like he's just playing around la-di-da, but he has a plan. He knows when he has to seed. He knows when he has to water. He knows when he has to weed. He knows when he has to harvest. So that's kind of going back to the keystone idea. We have duality, but really, they're not that different. We need language to separate things, to put them into categories, but really it's all one. You know what I mean? That's kind of, we're getting into Eastern ideology, but I think that's important, is that sometimes things seem different or contradictory, but they're still a part of one machine, one bigger idea. And to understand the big idea, you have to break it down. Like, for example, what is planet? What is time? Well, there's night and there's day. But time is always going. It doesn't stop. It's all just one time. So sometimes that's another way about writing songs, is that we get so caught up in what something is that we forget about what something could be. And then that's sometimes enough in art. Sometimes it doesn't have to give the solutions to the problems of the world. Sometimes it's enough just to highlight a problem or to say that something isn't right and to give the reasons why. You don't always need the big resolution at the end. It can be enough in and of itself to just say something is good or something is bad. So it's been said that experiencing music or art is the gateway to creating art. And that comes back to my idea that you got to fill the brain. You got to fill the brain with ideas, with techniques, just so you have stuff to pull upon. So you have stuff to go to for ideas. If you just have nothing in your head, it's going to be hard to come up with things. And that's often what creating is you're taking what exists in the world and you're recombining it in an interesting way. So you need to have stuff in the brain already. But like I said, we've all listened to music all the time, you know what I mean, since we were kids. So you already have a huge bank of things in your brain. And the next part is really deciding what kind of songs you write, experimenting, and then seeing if you want to keep them, you know. There's a special relationship between the creator and his art. You know, I always kind of compare it to like the mother. You know, obviously I'll never know what it means to be a mother or to be pregnant, but in a way you carry this thing inside you. You carry these ideas inside you, and at some point, if it happens, you bring things into the world. You bring a new song into the world, or a new picture, or a new art. So you gotta love your songs. And sometimes it takes a long time for the songs to really grow up and mature. But nurture them, take care of them. And don't take them for granted. Like sometimes you get like a 2-line idea in your head and it rhymes and it just sounds cool. It's not a song yet, but it's just an idea. It's an image. It's a picture. Don't take those for granted. Sometimes that's enough to build a whole song. You know what I mean? And sometimes it's hard when you're looking at a blank page to know where to start. Sometimes already having that idea that just floated in your head when you were washing the dishes or driving home, that's a great place to start. So just start by collecting those little fragments and seeing where you can go from there. So I don't know. I'm going to try and think about, is there anything else I want to say this episode? Obviously, it's such a huge topic that it's hard to start. But again, the idea for this episode was story. Something has to be happening. We all know what a story is. And not just the physical aspect of a story, but what it feels like to experience a story. You know what I mean? We all remember being kids and having books read to us, and just the way it transports you somewhere. It brings you to another world, and you kind of get pulled along on a journey. So in a way, the stuff you write has to be memorable. It has to be engaging. It has to want to bring you along. And there's a lot of ideas about what you do to do that, but that's kind of the most important to remember, is that it has to be impactful. It has to engage, and to do that, it has to be pleasant. It has to be memorable. You have to use language in an interesting way. And again, I'm saying these halves, but I mean, these are good strategies to do that. But just keep working at it. I think I'll end today by talking a little bit about the first song I ever wrote. And I'd been learning guitar, and I had 4 chords. Like, I didn't know how to play other songs. I didn't take guitar lessons, so I didn't have 10 covers that I knew. I just had chords that I learned, and then chords that I would combine. So I had this little progression. And then one day, I just wrote lyrics. And it was talking about, we were at camp, and we were like the old kids. And it was like a girl that I met. So really, I mean, and there was all these metaphors and all these stuff. But that's how the first song came. I had been working a lot on the music, and then it was just there. That doesn't really as helpful as I think. But I'm just trying to maybe talk about something bigger where there's always a block. Until you've experienced something, you don't really understand it. There's an old saying where it's, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. So there's no supplement for actually experiencing something. So maybe, if nothing else, these videos can just be an encouragement to try. Because even if you fail, that's not the end of it. There's another old saying: the master has failed more times than the student has tried. So I like that saying because it acknowledges that this stuff doesn't just happen overnight. You have to experience, you have to experiment, and you kind of have to fail. It sucks to fail, but you can still love them. You know what I mean? You can still love your songs that are kind of crappy because it's part of the process. And they probably taught you something anyways too. So I guess to finish this is the best way to write songs is just to try it. To just not be kind of afraid, like, is this going to be the most amazing thing? I like to compare art to food a lot. You know, yes, food sustains, and you need it to live. But there's types of food. There's fast food, you know, that's kind of shitty, but it's cheap and it fills you up, and it's kind of tasty when you eat it till like 15 minutes later. Then there's food that like your grandma makes that's like wholesome, and there's tradition there, and there's just like vitamins. Like, what am I trying to say? Vitality. Like it infuses you with life, and I think art is like that. And I think for those reasons we need art. I mean, you can live without art, but I think it infuses and it feeds something else in us. And another kind of sidestep to that metaphor is that we don't like to eat the same thing every day. That's kind of boring. So, you know, when you're creating something, you don't have to imagine that this is something that someone's going to listen to on repeat for the rest of their life. They can just listen to it once, and that's enough. Like, I mean, there's like 6 billion people in the world. If you could get, what is it, like 0.0000001% of the population to like your song, that's maybe enough. You know what I mean? Or it's enough to start. And I guess, like, if you never start, you're never going to get better. You know what I mean? And you're never going to know. So there's probably already a drive in you that you want to write. If you've been watching this video for a while, like for as long as this has been, there's already a drive in you. And you can't buy drive. You can't pay for it. It has to be in the person. You know what I mean? And it's not in everyone, or, you know what I mean? It's not the same drive. Maybe everyone has drive, but it's not going to be for the same thing. You know what I mean? Not everyone has to be a songwriter. You know what I mean? It takes a village to have a community, to have a society. Not everyone is the songwriter in their village. But if you want to be the songwriter in your village, or you want to have a voice, you have that right. You know what I mean? If there's nothing else I can say, is that you have the right to create. And you should enjoy it. And I'm going to probably keep making videos and try and talk about this elusive nature or this elusive subject of creating, because it's something that I love to do, and I've been doing it for a while, so I have ideas. I don't have the truth. I don't have a magic potion, but there's things I've noticed, and I'm going to try and share them with people. So have a good experience writing your next song.